Neurodiversity is an intricate world. It encompasses a wide range of brain differences, each influencing cognition, behaviour and social interactions, often in unique, misunderstood ways. Today, we're asking the question, do MBTI types and temperament play a role in understanding neurodivergent individuals? Now, you might be wondering, what's the connection between personality types and neurodiversity? Well, stick around, because we're about to unpack this intriguing intersection. We all know that every child's unique, but have you ever wondered how different personality types and temperaments can influence the way that neurodiverse kids and adults interact in the world around them? So grab a coffee, get comfy, and let's find out together. I'm Kate Mason, and welcome to Parenting and Personalities. This is the podcast that connects you to the ones you care about the most. I have with me today Sam Young. Sam is a growth-minded, two-time Fulbright scholar and director of Young Scholars Academy, a strength-based, talent-focused virtual enrichment centre that supports twice exceptional students and their families. Sam is a neurodivergent educator who has ADHD. As an ADHD learner, he has a tremendous understanding of, experience in, and respect for all things related to the neurodiverse education. Before founding Young Scholars Academy, Sam taught in a variety of capacities, including nearly a decade in the Bridges Academy and an array of programs through the US and Europe and Asia. I spoke with Sam on our previous podcast episode, number 105, about neurodiversity and the twice exceptional child at his Young Scholars Academy, which supports neurodiverse students and their caregivers all around the world. Whether you're a neurodivergent parent, or a parent and a caregiver, or simply curious about the interplay between personality types and neurodiversity, then this episode is for you. Hi Sam, it's great to have you back with us today, and there's still so much to talk about.
Hi Kate, thanks so much for having me back. I'm thrilled to be here again.
Thank you. Now, as we know, we're all unique individuals. We're shaped not by just our innate differences and similarities of personality, which is what I talk about, but also by our lives, where we're born, our friends, our family, our cultures, and, so many other things. Now, when we touch on the relationship between the Myers-Briggs type indicator, personality types, and neurodiversity, it's a really interesting area of discussion, but it is really important that I discuss it with caution today. We don't want to take things out of line of what they truly are, because MBTI types and neurodiversity are two different concepts that measure different aspects of, individuals' personality and their cognitive functioning. Now, however, if we were to take a look at innate personality traits, which we've all got, do you think that kids' and adults' personality are important to understand in the neurodivergent space?
Yeah, I would say if anything else, it's just a layer on top, right? So, like trait theory psychology is this idea that we're sort of an amalgamation of different traits, right? That we understand and perceive and often try to quantify through tests. The neurodiversity layer is almost like kind of a fog that rolls in that can make these traits perhaps exponentially more pronounced, sometimes though hidden behind the fog. And sometimes it can also cover these traits in a way that we might not see them. They might be latent. They might not develop until later, or perhaps we're looking at a different timeline. But they can be sort of a compounding effect, which can make them louder, bigger, stronger, or perhaps more masked or covered, or more of a struggle.
Yeah. So if we start today and we go, let's just start looking at extroversion, introversion. So drawing your energy from the external world with the extroversion and introversion from the internal world. Do you see a connection of that through your students and an overemphasis of either of those in yourself or in anyone that you teach?
What's interesting is, again, neurodiversity as like a bucket is so broad, right? So that someone who is, for example, autistic and might be, there's a theory, a concept in autism in the neurodivergent communities called masking, which essentially manifests as some version of covering oneself, as a mask suggests. And that can often be quite tiring. So we can have kids who may be fairly extroverted in some way, but the way in which they're feeling like they need to show up in the world is completely draining them. And these are the kids who go to school, everybody seems to get on with, and then they come home and they just fall apart, or it's like a bomb went off, right? They're just so tired from trying to be inauthentic to themselves. So that's why I say that it's sort of like a dense fog. You might have someone who's extroverted or introverted and is working so hard to present in a different way because of different norms and so forth, that they don't actually get to explore, develop their personality types because they're doing it in a way that's maybe more neurotypical or neuronormal rather than the way that's maybe more innate for them.
So as an adult neurodivergent person like yourself, or who can think about these types of things, is it kind of good to know at times that maybe I am an introvert and it is really okay that I am totally overwhelmed by being out there and I don't need to try and push myself forward? I mean, this is what I talk about with introverts themselves, is that a lot of the time introverts are masking themselves in the real world. They're always on show, no matter neurodivergent or not. It's always being on show. And when I talk to people who are introverted, they go, oh, thank goodness, I don't really have to put on this front. There are other people. And because they're so busy doing it, they don't actually look around and go, is anybody else like me? Is anyone else overwhelmed? I've got a husband that's overwhelmed if he goes out 3 times on a weekend. I'm an extrovert. He's living with someone who loves to go out every day, all the time, and so we have to find that balance in our relationship. And him recognizing that has given him great power, because he says, I know I'm overwhelmed. I don't want to do it. So sometimes I think it's really good for individuals to know, and our opposite might be in extroversion, that they might be the person that actually goes to the high end of talking too loudly and never giving anyone a space in a conversation. How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, it's. I had a talk this morning with families in a state's gifted association, and I was talking about ways to help kids socialize through their strengths. It was the name of the talk, and the basic premise was very much what you're talking about right now. I was saying, how can we model this sort of self-awareness that comes with, this is who I am and this is how I am, right? And like my wife and I are very different as well. She loves her ideal Sunday is like activity in the morning and then spend the whole day on the couch recharging, vegging out. And mine is like, let's go out, and after this, we're going to do that. And part of it is keeping up the dopamine, right? Keeping excited and so forth, and being aware. So I think helping our kids understand, this might pop bubbles in a good way. It's not that you're not capable of socializing. It's not that you can't make friends, but you might be an introvert, and you may very well socialize more successfully in smaller group settings. You might socialize more successfully after long periods of rest. You might socialize more successfully in certain environments, and extroverts the same. So I think bringing that awareness, as I said before, neurodiversity can be a compound on a personality trait. And we have to be careful, because sometimes we misrepresent things. We might see a personality trait on display that is not accurate. We might see someone as being aggressive or something else, and they may have an overexcitability, which is a whole other concept in psychology. Dabrowski said that there's these different domains for overexcitabilities, and we might be bothered by certain sensitivities. So this could be like a fabric or a uniform at a school. It could be bright lights or sounds. And so sometimes we might see something on display that's actually, it's bad data because we're making an assumption about someone's, let's say, personality type. Or we might, worst of all, often see people's intellectual difficulties as behavior struggles, right? And we're like, they're acting up again. And they may just be, I love the quote, and I forget who said it, but like, our kids do well when they can, right? Our kids do well when they can. So if they cannot, the question is not what's wrong with them, it's what's wrong with the environment. What's wrong, what's going on that's preventing them from doing well. And then we can kind of peel that back and look at, okay, this person's more extroverted, they're more introverted, they're just fatigued, or whatever it might be. And a big one is like the feelings, right? We talked about this in the last episode, is that a lot of the times our kids are huge empaths, right? they feel outsized feelings because they have outsized amygdala, and they might have like really strong senses of empathy. If someone has a headache and is struggling in class, that class can't move on for this child because they want to make sure that person's okay. Or if someone's cat died or grandfather is sick or something, like, stop, send me home right now because this is not a place where I can learn anymore because I'm so worried about the person. And it's so sweet and endearing. So again, I think that these types just become magnified or sometimes masked.
Yeah. So in that area that you're talking right now is the area there's an area of thinking and feeling in our preferences and how we first, we can all use both of them, of course, which is the whole idea of that. But in the MBTI, you have your feeling and your thinking preferences, and one's more logical than the other, so the empathetic feeling type is often the one that's the first one to go in with their feelings, and the thinking type is more logical about what happens. And so that's an overwhelming empathy of a feeling type that you're talking about. And so do you think that there would be also the overwhelming thinking type of person that says dead straight what they're thinking and not thinking they're going to be hurting anyone's feelings? Is that over exemplified as well in this area, in this space?
Absolutely. I mean, that's the stereotype, I think, harmful at times, but it's a stereotype of someone with autism, right? And the idea is not that autistic people don't experience emotions or care to hurt other people. The opposite. Many people are incredibly attuned with wanting to make sure that, many autistic people, individuals with autism, have outsized a sense of justice. And there's many kids who will not use accommodations because they don't want to do something unfair. They don't want extended time on their test or whatever it might be because they have such a sense of justice. There's an idea that was floated. I can't remember the name of the person who said this originally, but the idea was the 10-5-15 rule, which is that you can have a kid who's 10 years old chronologically, and as a thinker, as an intellect, they might be 15. They're asking big questions and delving deeply, and perhaps bothered by moving on in class. Okay, we're done with this unit. How can we be done? We haven't mastered, right? And then that same child can be, so it's 10-5, and then 10-15-5 in this way. They're 10 years old, 15 years intellectually, and then maybe 5 years emotionally. Because when their thinking or when their perceiving or whatever it might be is interrupted, then they can have a difficult time. And that's what that great asynchrony of like, how can we be having a graduate level conversation and then you're crying when you drop your ice cream? How is this the same person? And so it's complex. But yes, our kids often do not want to just go on for the sake of going on or just wrap up the unit because we have to move on. They think deeply. They have more questions than they did before, and they need to explore them.
Yeah. And that's that logic and need for answers in that sense. I totally get that. So
I didn't even answer your question. I'm sorry. So you're
which one?
I went on a little
Which
roundabout.
one?
But you were saying the idea of sort of like I think upsetting people by accident. And yeah, there's some research that talks about mirror neurons, right, which is what we have to help us experience other people's feelings and act in certain ways. And people, autistic people, experience certain mirror neuron differences where they may not catch a cue that someone is not interested in them talking about their interest or not interested at that time, whatever it might be. And so, I have students who are like, what's the point of asking about the weather? I don't care. I just want to talk about trains, right? Like, why would we, if a person really likes me, they just want to talk about trains too. Why would we waste time on that? Or, why would I write a 5-paragraph essay when I can explain this to you in very simple terms in 2 sentences, right? Which is incredibly logical. Like, why do we make you do that?
That's right. Why do we have small talk? If my goal is for you to learn this thing, like, show me you get it. And if you can do like the Feynman technique, if you can describe like astrophysics to an 11-year-old in 2 sentences, by God, you're brilliant. So I think that there's a lot of the time it's an us problem, which is that we have these kind of conventions, small talk, banter, and things like that. And, the world wasn't necessarily built in an inclusive way for people with autism and other neurodiversities. And so,
it's important that we change that. It's important that people who are autistic and neurodivergent have more agency and can shape some of the social conventions. We're seeing more representation. Sesame Street now has an autistic character, and television, Love on the Spectrum and these things, whether or not these are helpful or harmful, it's there. People are seeing it and experiencing it. And I think that's incredibly important.
So do I. And I think it's incredibly important to hear on TikTok. I watch some young adults that are autistic and explaining what's happening for them in their head and how they feel about things. And that's really empowering because we don't know, and how great is that to actually hear that they're comfortable enough to be able to say that, probably because no one's watching really, that they can see in that sense. And they're able to talk about it because no one knows. It's it's amazing. And I think we do create small talk. We are, society is small talk. That's what we do. And when someone cuts to the chase and says, get rid of it, and it doesn't even have to be neurodivergent, it could be anyone, it's a bit of a shock to all of us because someone's straight to what they want to know. So yeah, we all perceive through our own little brains and how we judge things and all the rest of it in that sense. But when we get back to the greatest thing I can see around your gifted people is this intuition, this looking at the whole world, being able to see things that other people can't see, and a brilliance in creativity, which is in the Myers-Briggs type indicator is a level, a preference. You get sensing or you're intuitive. And I come from a very sensing world. I'm very sensing. I'm very concrete about what I do every day. I don't have amazing ideas. I can push myself, but I do have very intuitive friends who are very creative. And if I ever want ideas, they're the people I go to because I know about sensing. So the basic thing about the MBTI is it gives people, like you say, another tool, another layer of understanding people. And for me, this is a really important layer because society is really sensing. I think the world's generally sensing because we're doing things so as a one fits all. And then we've got the people that one fit doesn't do. And they're the intuitives. And even at a lower level of intuition, they still don't, they feel left out of society. I've had people in my workshops say, oh, I always thought I was weird. I had all these really different ideas and I did these things and everybody used to kind of, put them to one side and I felt left out. So explain the intuition once again for us, just a little bit of your exceptional side of that.
Yeah, I think there's so many different brain functionalities and sort of avatars of brains, right? It's really more like a thumbprint, if you were to think of it, right? We think a lot of the times that there's sort of like this, it's this or it's that. And when we think about a continuum or fingerprints, that they're all different, although they're similar traits. People who are intuitive, who have this kind of basal intuition, often experience things quite differently. They see things quite differently. These can be the comedians of the world, right? People who what is comedy? But it's noticing trends and through lines that other people fall to all the time. I have, students who do funny things like they'll flip conversation. Instead of saying, what do most people say, at least in the United States, say like, hey, how are you? And the other person says, good, and you? And I have these kids who are like, flip it. And they just go up to someone and they're like, good, and you? And they skip the first step and just see how it kind of, affects people. I think people who are intuitive also see big picture, right? They're kind of, they see the sort of macro. And a lot of the kids, really brilliant takeaways, right? These young people who see things that are not apparent to many other people who are just kind of maybe rule following and they're in the thick of it. Whereas someone else who can maybe be more of like a wallflower at time, they might sit back and see a pattern. I had a student once say that both were studying the 1950s and he pointed out that both culture and counterculture are all manufactured, right? Just as there's a store selling, in the 1950s, there's a store selling stuff to like the squares and the straight shooters. There's also a store selling stuff to the nerds, and there's a store selling stuff to the rebels, right? And so all of these different things that he's like, this is a massive through line. These are the brains that are going and writing music, that are writing and acting, and And another interesting thing, I mentioned this to you before the episode, is I just got back from this trip to Egypt. And I was thinking a lot about, I went to an oracle temple, one of the great oracles, the oracles of Amun, which were up there with like the oracles of Delphi, right? And I was thinking about, what kind of medium someone would be to be this person who's, they have the power to tell a pharaoh, a divine leader, right, what their future holds. And I found myself thinking a lot about, many quirky people who have, whether they might be like a medium or whether they might feel like they're connected to some other spiritual something. A lot of really different brains might be tapping into different feelings and things that I talk about trends like societal trends, but they also might be tapping into like other energy fields and things that we're not maybe aware of. And I don't think that gets talked about as enough. I don't really have many like research to back that up, but I just think it's a really interesting space, and I think that there's all kinds of intuition, and that we should really value that much higher than we do sometimes. And the last thing I'll say about intuition is that it's something that we like want people to cultivate, but don't necessarily teach how. How do you cultivate intuition? That doesn't sound right. And for someone who is incredibly logical, like maybe yourself,
who sees I call myself sensible, I'm always sensible. Yeah.
Right. Maybe exercises and cultivating intuition and vice versa, by the way, because you said that like you go to people when you need big ideas, and people probably go to you when they need things done, or when they need like a reality check, or when they need to follow up, right? And so these different brains are really in need of one another, I think, in a big way.
Yeah, they are, and it is what you're just saying about the intuition then, and intuition in terms of spiritual and like you say, medium. My goodness, I have so many interesting conversations with my intuitive friends around that. That's another conversation altogether at a different time on a different thing. But, you're psychics, and had one the other day. So it is really fascinating, and they see the world differently, and they see others in the world that we don't see. So, you have to kind of defy logic all around those kind of experiences. So the last one on the MBTI is judging and perceiving. And when you talk about, sometimes people's desks are just so messy and they're out of control. And then we have perhaps, I don't know, tell me if I'm saying it incorrectly, like the autistic person whose life has to be so structured that you pull one bit out and the world can kind of collapse around them. I heard one woman describing it like a block, think of blocks, and one block goes and your whole day just disintegrates. And that's kind of the extremes of either, and the person that can't organise themselves. That is also on a natural level. They are the differences on very natural levels, and I'm the disorganised one. My desk is a huge mess here at the moment, and I know that and I understand that. And but there are people out there who come in, and some people come in and just fix things for me in my house. They'll tidy up, and they're good friends, so I allow them to, and I understand who they are and all the rest of it. But that taken once again to a higher level of extremities, where do you see that in the neurodivergent space?
I think for a lot of people, these things can manifest as versions of masking, right? If I have perfect handwriting and if everything is in order, then I'll slip under the radar, or it might allow me to process. Maybe having a fidget or a tinker might allow me to expend some anxious energy while I listen, and not doing that might be harmful. I forget the cliche, but it's something like, basically prioritizing people who have a messy desk, right? It's like, give me the person with a messy desk if I want something done. It's you're so focused and entrenched on the work and things that nothing else matters. I ask myself, is it functional? Like when we do executive function work to kids, like, hey, if I ask you for this, that, and the other, can you find it? I don't care what it looks like if it works, right? So if you can do the tasks and the things that are required of you, I don't think it matters. People used to say like a messy desk is a sign of genius and so forth. I don't know that there's any correlation between these things, but it's. I think that we like to, we see extreme examples. We see someone who maybe has autism and OCD, right? They're not the same, but it's someone who has obsessive compulsions, right? Who needs to regulate certain things around them due to superstitious beliefs that harm might come to them. That's different. than someone who's maybe sensitive to their environment, has curated an environment around them. And also some people are just really particular about their things. They might be completely tuned into the health of their computer or their desk is their everything. And others might be completely unaware. They might leave their computer and desk and not remember where they left them because they're so entrenched in thought. And these could be both kids with the same profile, just presenting differently and experiencing differently. So I think just, again, having a good support network, having a good, psychologist that can help. If the question is always, is this a limiting behavior? Is this something, someone's neatness or messiness, is it preventing them from living their life, or can they make it through and still self-actualize? And if the answer is yes, then perhaps that we should have some kind of interventions. If there's not exposure to systems, hey, we want to put things in different folders or different buckets, or we want to have a home for things. That works really well. If you have kids who are struggling, give everything a home. This is where the keys live. This is where the clothes live. Dr. Sarah Ward, one of my favorite executive function people, and she says, like, having a drop zone for things, like this is where clothes get dropped, like this is like the spot, like in this ring, and involving our kids in that as much as possible is really helpful. And so I think it's a really interesting one. Yeah, we can have similar brains and present so incredibly differently. We can have very different brains and present somewhat similarly. But I don't know that any of them are any indicator of anything quite significant, or if it's just preference, or lack of interest.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah. Who cares, really? But also the other thing about the MBTI I was just going to chat to you just briefly about is that parents also understanding themselves and how they react possibly to, having a child with different needs. Different people react really differently. And I often say to people, look, it's just really good to have some tools about who you are, how you react, what kind of temperament you have. Some people are very explosive, very calm. You have your, as parents taking on board news, teaching their children, some parents must step away and not want anything to do with it. So a lot of the time, understanding yourself and your partner, if you have a neurodivergent child, how you tick as a couple and cope with things is really, really important. And, these are the kind of tools that I think might be out there for more, that type of issue as well, because it must be hard, handling that situation.
I mentioned this morning that I did a talk. It was like this 10 tips. It's called Reimagining Socializing for Twice Exceptional Kids. And I often joke that it's a bait and switch, because I'm saying, parents, I'm going to help your kids socialize. And then basically the thrust of the talk is, how can we help you, parents, check yourselves? And I say that there's really three directions, there's sort of three buckets that people can fall into, which is, one, my child's experience, diagnosis is so similar to my own that it's triggering. Two can be the opposite. I can't relate. I was not like this, therefore I'm having a hard time connecting or empathizing. Kind of the get over it, work harder kind of parent. And then the third is sort of somewhere in between, which is, I'm not quite sure where I am or where my child falls. But I think that getting data, as you say, on your child and you, sharing the journey, being vulnerable, walking your kiddo through what was difficult for you when you were young, and listening to them specifically, any kind of, whether you're doing personality types or whatever, any kind of journaling that you can do, right? Because reflecting, hey, last weekend we had a really great socializing experience. What was different about that? Or, this project at school went incredibly, horribly wrong. And what was different about that? Getting a little bit more information is only going to help your child become more self-aware. And yeah, it starts with us, right? We have to check our own baggage. We have to do our own deep work. We have to be the sort of immovable rock as much as possible. And sort of getting good data on ourselves is where we can start to help.
Yeah. Sam, thank you for your passion and your intelligence and your knowledge. And I'm sure that anyone listening will be so keen to share what you're talking about today with me and on our the previous podcast. So thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. I'd love to talk to you again.
Thank you. Thank you again. And as I said last time, I really appreciate the space that you're holding for people. So thank you so much, Kate, for having me on.
Today we've explored the significance of self-awareness for both parents and neurodivergent individuals, helping them to understand their own MBTI type and temperament. For those of you who resonate with this, such insights can boost empathy, customise parenting strategies, enhance communication, and ultimately relieve stress and burnout. With the knowledge you've gained today, I hope this will help you foster greater empathy and understanding towards individuals with learning differences and those who support them. Thanks for listening to Parenting and Personalities. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love it if you could leave a rating and a review that would help others learn about this podcast. If you're interested in discovering more about you and your family's personality types, you'll find my book, Who Is This Monster or Treasure in My House, on Booktopia or Amazon. If you have an episode idea, please send a note to thepersonalitycoach@gmail.com. Many thanks to our producers at Stories and Strategies, and we'll see you next time.